Well, it seems that Tyranids are getting an interesting and powerful new faction-wide rule. Let's talk about some monsters with 4 plus invuls and some massive damage and defensive buffs with these new Synaptic Imperatives. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Tyranids once more, and it seems that the leaks have culminated in really quite a lot of the Tyranid Codex being posted online. Hopefully it won't be too much longer before I get a full review of the book out, but in the meantime I thought we'd stop off to take a look at a really interesting new mechanic, which appears to be the entire army-wide rule for the Tyranids called Synaptic Imperatives. In Codex Tyranids, it seems that the main Synapse ability is largely just going to be ignoring leadership now. The Synaptic Link abilities do still exist to some extent. They've been changed a bit and are kind of baked into the Tyranid datasheets for free now, though the abilities have been changed really quite a bit. This Synaptic Imperatives rule is a whole new mechanic. It's the one that Tyranids get if their entire army is just Codex Tyranids, and you can access some really crazy buffs from it on a turn-by-turn basis. So let's talk about what we've got and which of the abilities are sounding strongest. So first up, these Synaptic Imperatives are only usable if every model in your army has the Hive Tendril keyword. That's basically the keyword for Codex Tyranids models now, and in addition to that, the entire army has to come from the same Hive fleet. You can't be mixing and matching, not that you're allowed to do that in tournament play anymore anyway. It seems that this is the Tyranid equivalent of, say, rules like the Martial Qatar for Custodes or Combat Doctrines for Space Marines. Basically, when you're mustering your army, each Synapse monster or unit that you include will allow you access to one buff at some point in the game. The amount of choices for these Synaptic Imperatives depending on what bugs you have on the table. At the start of each battle round, you basically look at the Synapse models that you have on the table, and then you choose one of the buffs from one of those models, and it basically becomes active for your army. For that battle round, every single one of the Synapse creatures will broadcast that buff. It appears to affect all Tyranid units within 6 inches of those models, and then after that's done, you can't use the ability again for the rest of the game. It means that each Synaptic Imperative is basically a one-turn thing. You're going to get up to 5 of them over the course of a game, but you can't just spam one that you like repeatedly. I think I do quite like it as a mechanic. It means that you're really incentivized to try and keep your Synapse units alive, particularly if they've got an important buff that you want later in the game. And it very much feels like you're playing like the Hive Mind, broadcasting your will through the various creatures that allow you to direct the swarms. The fact that it happens at the start of the battle round is also quite useful compared with it being in the command phase. It means in battle round 1 your opponent won't get any chance to kill your monsters before they can deliver their buffs, and for any defensive ones it means that you get to activate them before your opponent gets their turn, rather than having to sit around and wait for your turn to start them off. So let's look through the different Synaptic Imperatives on offer then. Each of the Synapse units within Codex Tyranids has one of these, and basically all of them apply as sort of 6-inch auras, though they don't actually have the aura keyword. I believe that means they can't be shut down by people stopping aura abilities, and what's more, they seem to apply to every single Tyranid within the army. They aren't locked to core, you can use them on characters, and on the biggest, heaviest hitting bugs. If you have a Hive Tyrant on the table, then you can use Relentless Ferocity. That allows fallback and charge, which I think is slightly tame maybe. Perhaps if you've got multiple Tyranid units locked up, then being able to jump back and redeclare targets could be handy, but maybe feels a little bit situational. Could be one to use really late game if you've still got a Hive Tyrant around. The Broodlord one is Predatory Guile. This one basically seems to be a revamping of the Synaptic Link ability. The Broodlord's Synaptic Link now actually allows it to give units a melee buff, and its cover granting ability has now been changed to this. This one's locked to infantry units, so you're not getting it on monsters, but infantry units get light cover and heavy cover if they already had light cover. Seems like that could be pretty useful on things like Tyranid warriors advancing forward, and potentially even more so on any other Tyranid infantry with a better save than 4+. I feel like they've got a small typo there. I'm almost certain that they meant to say dense cover, not heavy cover. That would make a lot more sense, as it's very similar to the Synaptic Link ability that they have already. I guess we'll see whether or not that's replicated in the print version. If it is, I feel it's quite likely to get changed in an FAQ. Still though, that could be just about army-wide light cover for infantry for a turn. Could be handy if you're fielding a bunch of swarms or a whole stomping host of warriors. Next up we have Guide Mind, the one for the Tyranid Prime. This one's actually a shooting buff, giving any units within 6 inches of Synapse units exploding 6s to hit when they shoot a target that's less than 24 inches away. A really powerful shooting buff, that one. Going to be particularly nice on any close range gun Tyranids. I'm sure the new Strength 5 Flesh Borers will thank you for that if they're within 6 inches of Synapse. Seems like basically an auto use for a shooty Nids army. The Turvigon gives you Surging Vitality, that's plus 2-inch movement when you're making normal moves or advances. Not a direct increase in damage dealing or survivability, but that's going to be insanely helpful turn 1, could help you get towards midfield objectives, could maybe be really helpful with units like Gene Stealers. A bit of extra movement might make the difference between a first turn charge or none. And the Neurothrope gives Psychic Augmentation, plus 1 to Psychic tests, plus 1 to Deny the Witch, and a 5+ save against mortal wounds. That one seems like the one to activate if you are facing someone like Grey Knights or Thousand Suns, who's going to be trying to drown your Tyranids under a whole host of mind bullets. That's going to be some seriously potent psychic defense combined with Shadow in the Warp, which in the new book gives you -1 to cast, and also gives you extra damage if you have perils within range. I do find it quite interesting that these could be a real incentive to take certain models in your Tyranid army. Say for example, a Tyranid Prime might just become a very popular HQ choice, if he is able to massively amp up your Tyranid shooting for a turn, by broadcasting his buff through all the Synapse organisms. Moving on, for the Trigon Prime, we have Thrashing Demise. I'm not quite so convinced with this one, to be honest. It gives you a +3 to your roll of death throws, which now only affects the single closest enemy unit, so that's usually going to be D3 mortal wounds. But for smaller bugs getting killed in combat, you roll a dice and on a 6 they deal 1 mortal wound. For me that does seem very tame unless you've got literally nothing else to declare. The Tyranid Warrior one is a very good one, I think. 6s in melee score 1 additional hit. A nice flat melee buff across everything within Synapse. Very hard to go wrong with, and again I think that that's going to be very popular like the Tyranid Prime ones. The Maliceptors one is really quite interesting. This one's Psychic Oversight. This allows you to do actions while shooting, advancing, falling back, and casting psychic powers. I've not had a chance to look at the new Tyranid secondaries yet, but it could be interesting if there's any actions there. But just in general, it isn't too bad for things like raising banners or retrieving Natmun data. Being able to advance and do that for a turn could be really handy, though I guess you are giving up some major buffs by using it over some of the other options. I'd say maybe the single craziest buff on this entire list though is probably Warp Shielding. This one's the one given by Zoanthropes, and monsters within range get a 4+ invul save, other models getting a 5+. Again, if I'm understanding that right, that would be a buff that's coming out of every single Synapse model on the board, not just the Zoanthropes. And even if that's just for a single turn, that is a staggering boost to durability. I guess you just use that on the turn where you're going to be most exposed, and you're most at risk of the enemy dealing major damage to your army before it hits home. The 5+ invul on the swarms I think is really impressive. Termagants or gargoyles and things are just going to be super annoying to shift with that. And of course a massive 4+ invul on monsters is crazy. A lot of them do have a 2+ armor save now, so it's not going to be relevant unless you're firing against them with AP -3 or better. But still, having a chance of 50-50 to shrug off the worst of the enemy's firepower is absolutely great. I feel like that could be a massive draw to having a unit of Zoanthropes in the army, even if their primary purpose is just to activate Warp Shielding. Finally, the Parasite of Mortrex is also a Synapse creature, and this one gives Swift Onslaught. That's a +3 inches to pile in and consolidate moves, apparently capped at a maximum of 9 inches if you do manage to get a whole load of combos going together. Very useful for battlefield positioning if you are thinking about overrunning the foe with a whole bunch of swarms. Again though, I do feel it's competing against some other very heavy hitters, things like the invuls or the increased shooting or melee damage. Overall, these look like really fun and really powerful buffs to have in the army. Though each of the abilities is super strong, I would bear in mind that this does come with some pretty major downsides as well. You can't use these buffs turn on turn, so you only get 1 turn of each of these great things. And if the opponent does manage to go for the big Synapse creatures and take them out before the buff is activated, then you're not going to be able to select them. Really gives your opponent an absolute desperation to take out certain Synapse models before they trigger this. Say for example trying to take out the Tyranid Prime before they activate their melee buff. That could make a really big difference to the game, or if you're able to keep your Synapse web intact, which feels very fluffy for the Nids. In any case, I'm certainly looking forward to having a good dig through the rest of the Tyranid Codex, so feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see that. Hopefully the big review shouldn't be too far off now. In any case, let me know your impressions on these. Looks like a really quite fun and strong army mechanic, if you ask me. Finally, if you have been enjoying all these videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, The link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.